Flying Solo, How Ruth Elder Soared into America's Hearts by Julie Cummins. Ruth Elder didn't look at all like her names. At 23 years old, she was a beauty queen with a sparkling personality, a smile as bright as a toothpaste ad, and with plenty of pluck. She was fascinated with newspaper stories about Charles Lindbergh's solo flight across the Atlantic. After taking just a few flying lessons, she was determined to become the female Lindbergh and to be the first woman to fly across the Atlantic. It wouldn't be easy. In 1927, airplanes were a thrilling but dangerous novelty. Most people, men and women, believed that a woman belonged in the kitchen and not the cockpit. Did that deter Ruth? Not one bit. She simply set out to prove them wrong. On October 11, 1927, Ruth and her co-pilot, flying instructor George Hadelman, prepared to take off for Paris in an American Girl, a plane as flamboyant as Ruth's personality. Ruth posed on the wing of the plane with a picnic basket. She winked and blew a kiss to her fans and the press as she claimed she had two reasons for flying to France. She wanted to be the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, and I have a desire to buy a Parisian evening gown, and why not fly to Europe to buy it? 2/3 of the way to their destination, after 36 hours in the air, an oil line on the plane ruptured. Serious trouble. No land was in sight, but Ruth spotted a ship below them. With no radio contact or radar, she grabbed 2 paper boxes, wrote help on them, and tossed them out of the plane. Luckily, one landed on the ship's deck. The captain pointed his ship towards land and quickly had a message painted on the deck that said the nearest land was 350 miles away, too far for a sputtering plane. Ruth and George were forced to ditch American Girl in the water. Just minutes after they were rescued, the plane burst into flames. Ruth declared, "We'll do it all over again." She never lost her courage or her lipstick. When the ship reached Europe, Ruth had to borrow an evening gown, but she was instantly famous for her daredevil feat. The public had a new heroine. European royalty welcomed her. A ticker tape parade was held in her honor in New York City. She was even invited to lunch at the White House. Ruth signed a $250,000 vaudeville tour contract, and Hollywood called. She appeared in 2 silent movies with Western stars Hoot Gibson and Richard Dix. But even though she relished the spotlight, America's heartthrob wasn't ready to fold up her wings. She wanted to prove to America that she was a real aviatrix. On August 18, 1929, Ruth and 19 other women set out to show that women could fly airplanes just as well as men in the first women's cross-country air race. The pilots had more than headwinds to counteract. One reporter sputtered, "The only thing worse than dames in planes is dames racing planes." The day of the big event arrived with a buzz of excitement and anxiety. It would be no piece of cake. The zigzag route started in Santa Monica, California, and finished in Cleveland, Ohio, covering 2,759 miles. The racers would have to pilot halfway across the country using only road maps and their own eyes to find their way. Ruth, flying solo this time, wasn't the only attraction. Amelia Earhart, who had beaten Ruth by being the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, was favored to win this race too. The other racers ran the gauntlet of experience, from aerobatic and transport pilots to plane builders, but they were all pioneers. As the women strapped themselves in and checked their maps and emergency provisions, a gallon of water, milk tablets, and beef jerky, Ruth and several other women took a second to powder their noses. From then on, the race was called a powder puff derby. By nature, Spunky Ruth wasn't easily cowed, but during the race she had a standoff with real cattle. On the second day, temperatures climbed to 120 degrees, causing extreme turbulence. The strong winds blew her maps over the side of the airplane, and she landed in a farmer's field to get her bearings and fill her water bottle. As luck would have it, cattle were grazing in the pasture, and all Ruth could think about was her plane, her red plane. Please God, let them all be cows, she prayed. But the farmer's wife was a bigger threat. Washing clothes outside in a wash tub, she marched over to the plane and yelled at Ruth for scaring the cattle. Ruth didn't dilly-dally. She just swung the plane around and took off. The story became the favorite and most embellished tale of the Derby. At every stop on the race course, crowds gathered to cheer women on. On the last leg, a farmer in Ohio plowed a huge arrow in the middle of his harvested corn crop, pointing towards Cleveland. The female pilots dipped their wings into him in appreciation. Ruth got lost a few more times, but she never lost her determination to prove she was a competent flyer and she could finish the race. It took 9 days of grit and gumption, but Ruth finished the course, placing 5th. She stood proudly beside the winner, Louise Thaden, and the other women pilots who had shaped aviation history. They had proved that women could fly as well as men. Ruth didn't leave it there. She adamantly claimed that American women would be fighter pilots in the future. And she was right. The end. Here is the AR number to take an AR test.